Armenians who are Christians claim a
This is Reuters.
Infighting among U.S. House Republicans stalled two spending measures on Tuesday, pushing the government even closer to the brink of shutdown by the end of the month. One involved a procedural but key vote to move forward a 30-day stopgap measure that would keep federal agencies afloat after funding expires on September 30th. But divisions in his party forced Republican House Speaker Kevin McCarthy to postpone the vote on Tuesday. It's a Republican proposal, but more than a dozen of the party's hardliners opposed it, enough to block its path forward in the House.
Welcome back to the swamp.
They want assurances that fiscal 2024 spending will not exceed $1.47 trillion, the top line of 2022. That's $120 billion less than McCarthy and Democratic President Joe Biden agreed to in May.
And we've reached a bipartisan budget agreement.
McCarthy later said he wanted to give lawmakers enough time to reach agreement on the legislation. Meanwhile, the other motion was again procedural, simply to open debate on a defense spending bill. It was also proposed by the Republicans, who narrowly control the House. But 5 GOP hardliners joined Democrats to block the motion, leaving it defeated by 2 votes. After the raucous session on Tuesday, several more moderate Republicans expressed frustration over the failures. Tom Cole, chair of the House Rules Committee, called the opposition from the small group of his party's hardliners very unfortunate. With less than 2 weeks to avoid a shutdown, lawmakers have begun discussing other options for keeping the government funded. There is at least one bipartisan House group whose members say they're working on a backup plan. Among them, Republican Representative Brian Fitzpatrick said, quote, "Just gotta keep trying to get to yes. And if we can't, and we're coming too close to the deadline, then plan B."
U.S. President Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, will plead not guilty to federal gun charges, his attorney said in a court filing on Tuesday. The 53-year-old was criminally charged last Thursday for allegedly making false statements when he purchased a gun and possessing a firearm while using illegal drugs at the time. The new charges came following a collapsed deal between the prosecutors and Hunter Biden in July, in which he would have pled guilty to 2 misdemeanor text charges and enrolled in a program to avoid prosecution on the gun charge. Hunter Biden is the first child of a sitting U.S. president to have been criminally indicted. The indictment came as he sits at the center of a political maelstrom.
Joe Biden deserves impeachment.
Last week, House Republicans have launched an impeachment inquiry into Joe Biden related to Hunter's foreign business dealings during his father's tenure in office under the Obama administration. They have so far presented no evidence showing that the elder Biden profited from his son's businesses. The White House has denied any wrongdoing. Hunter has long been the focus of unrelenting attacks by former President Donald Trump and his Republican allies. Trump will likely go against Joe Biden in a rematch in the 2024 U.S. presidential election.
Bankrupt crypto exchange FTX sued the parents of founder Sam Bankman-Fried on Monday, saying they enriched themselves with company funds. FTX is now led by John Ray, an expert in helping companies recover assets after bankruptcy. It's clawed back more than $7 billion so far since its bankruptcy in November 2022, after it emerged an inside circle at FTX benefited from misappropriating billions in customer funds. The FTX lawsuit on Monday alleges Joseph Bankman and Barbara Fried, both Stanford University professors, of accepting a $10 million cash gift and a $16 million luxury property in the Bahamas, and that they pushed FTX to make tens of millions of dollars in donations, including to Stanford University. The lawsuit said the company founder Sam Bankman-Fried ran it as a family business. It said his father, Joseph Bankman, a scholar in tax law, positioned himself as the adult in the room in the company, but stayed silent when he saw warning signs of fraud, and he did little to prevent customer funds from being misappropriated. Meanwhile, Barbara Fried, the mother, was the strongest influence on FTX's political contributions, causing FTX's former leaders to siphon millions directly to a political action committee she co-founded. Attorneys representing the parents in a statement called FTX's claims completely false. As for FTX's founder Sam Bankman-Fried, he pled not guilty to charges of fraud, and he's currently jailed ahead of a trial that will begin early next month.
Azerbaijan launched military action in the Nagorno-Karabakh region on Tuesday, a move that could foreshadow a new war. It says it did so to drive out what it claims are Armenian troops. Armenia and Azerbaijan were both members of the Soviet Union, and in the 3 decades since its collapse, they've already fought 2 wars. Here's a look at how we got here. Nagorno-Karabakh is at the center of the conflict. It's a mountainous region within Azerbaijan and is internationally recognized as part of it. But it's known as Artsakh by Armenians, and its 120,000 inhabitants are predominantly ethnic Armenians. They have their own government, which is close to Armenia, but not officially recognized by it or any other country. Armenians, who are Christians, claim a presence in the area dating back several centuries before Christ. Azerbaijan, whose inhabitants are mostly Turkic Muslims, also claim deep historical ties. Bloody conflict between the two peoples goes back more than a century. The region saw 2 wars after the Soviet Union crumbled. One that took place between 1988 and 1994, and a second that lasted 44 days in 2020. Over the course of the 2 wars, tens of thousands died. In the first war, over 1 million people were displaced. Most of those were Azeris, driven from their homes when Armenia ended up with control over Nagorno-Karabakh. In the second, Azerbaijan managed to take back a third of Nagorno-Karabakh. Russia brokered a ceasefire between the two, providing peacekeepers to guard the Lachin corridor, a crucial road that connects the territory to Armenia. Analysts say successive rounds of talks have brought the two sides closer to a permanent peace treaty, but a final settlement remains elusive. Tensions started ratcheting up again when a group of Azerbaijani civilians, identifying themselves as environmental activists, began blocking the Lachin corridor. An Azerbaijan checkpoint was set up, blocking the flow of goods to Armenia. It caused what the US called a rapidly deteriorating humanitarian situation. The International Committee of the Red Cross was able to make aid deliveries this week.
Ford already faces a strike in the US, but it seems to have dodged a second walkout in Canada. The auto giant reached a deal with unions there late on Tuesday. Unifor, which represents around 5,600 Canadian auto workers, had threatened to strike if a deal wasn't reached by midnight. But talks went on past the deadline and agreement was found. Unifor said it had leveraged the threat of a walkout. Now neither side has revealed details of the agreement, which still has to be ratified by union members. Unifor had been seeking improved pay and conditions, among other demands. Strikes continue in the US, however. The United Auto Workers Union has called the first ever coordinated action at the Detroit 3, Ford, General Motors and Chrysler parent Stellantis. That has halted output at factories making vehicles, including Ford's Bronco SUV. The union says an offer of pay rises of up to 20% is not good enough. One striking worker said they also wanted a more equitable workplace.
Just fair wage structure for my younger coworkers that are coming in. Right now, it's just not fair that they're working next to people that are making twice as much as them, and there's not a whole lot of light at the end of the tunnel.
Now the UAW says it will announce on Friday whether it plans to escalate the industrial action. If strikes do spread, analysts bet the union will target plants making popular vehicles, including pickup trucks.
Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says Canada is not trying to provoke India by alleging it's linked to the murder of a Sikh separatist leader.
What's your reaction to that?
But says he wants answers.
India, the government of India, needs to take this matter with the utmost seriousness. We are doing that. We are not looking to provoke or escalate. We are simply laying out the facts as we understand them.
The Sikh leader in question is Hardeep Singh Nijjar. His image still hangs outside the Vancouver area Sikh temple where he was shot dead in June. He supported the creation of an independent Sikh homeland in northern India called Khalistan. New Delhi has long been unhappy over Sikh separatist activity in Canada, which has the largest population of Sikhs outside Punjab. India branded Nijjar a terrorist in 2020. It says Trudeau's allegations are absurd. The dispute has dealt a fresh blow to the poor diplomatic ties between the two countries. Each has expelled a diplomat over the affair. In Canada, emotions ranged from relief from Nijjar's son.
It was just a matter of time for when the truth would come out. So when we heard that news today, it was a sense of relief that, it's finally coming to the public eyes that, the Indian government is involved.
To outrage from Canada's World Sikh Organization.
To see a Canadian attacked on Canadian soil by a foreign country, I think we can't understate how shocking that news is.
But in India, protesters denounced Trudeau's explosive assertions. A source who spoke to Reuters said concern over the killing is directly linked to Canada's pressing pause on a trade deal with India worth billions. Officials have not shed light on why they think India is connected to the killing, but a separate source says Ottawa worked very closely with the U.S. on it.
Punto primo, io non consentirò che l'Italia diventi un campo profughi d'Europa. Punto secondo, in ogni caso, anche se ci fossero, al governo persone con una visione immigrazionista come quelli che c'erano prima, il problema non lo fermi in Italia. Quindi l'unico modo è dichiarare guerra ai trafficanti. E questo va fatto con il supporto di tutto il sistema multilaterale, con la volontà di tutte le nazioni che non accettano di farsi, ricattare da organizzazioni criminali e dall'altra parte con un lavoro molto serio che va fatto in Africa, continente che sta vivendo una condizione molto difficile, sulla quale non sempre l'atteggiamento che l'Europa e l'Occidente hanno avuto era l'atteggiamento giusto. Ecco.
Some auto industry leaders are not happy with Britain's potential rethink on plans for electric vehicles. This week, British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is expected to water down some measures meant to help the country hit a target of net zero emissions by 2050. That includes pushing back its current plan to ban new petrol and diesel car sales by 2030 to 5 years later. Sunak is expected to argue the response to climate change should be more proportionate. But that has drawn the anger of Ford UK, which said Britain risked undermining the transition to EVs. Ford said dropping the 2030 deadline would be a mistake and hinted it could put further investments in the country at risk. Ford said it had already invested over $530 million in its UK facilities and had been planning to spend even more to fit with the 2030 timeline. The US auto giant said Britain's policy should focus on helping the EV market grow in the short term. There was further criticism of the possible change from a leading auto industry trade body. The Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders said the auto industry had already invested billions in new EVs, but it said the transition to clean energy could be put in danger without a clear and consistent message from the government.
Ryanair faces a probe by the Italian Competition Authority. Regulators say they are investigating the company over possible abuse of a dominant position in the market. The ICA says it suspects the airline exerted power over sectors such as hotels and car rental. It says Ryanair may have limited travel agencies' ability to sell its tickets as part of a package with accommodation and other services. The Irish carrier is Europe's largest airline and a market leader in Italy. Back in December, the ICA opened a probe into possible price fixing on some domestic flights over the Christmas holidays. That investigation covers airlines including Ryanair, Wizz and EasyJet. In August, Rome adopted a measure to cap airfares to the islands of Sicily and Sardinia, but Ryanair and other airlines have challenged the legality of that move under EU law.
نحن حاليا تو نسكن خارج المدينة وحنحاول إذا كان ربي ما سخرش الحال وضع البلاد ما عادش من جديد حنقلموا أنفسنا مع حياة جديدة، حياة ناس جديدة، بيت جديد، سكن جديد، عمل جديد، هذا ونتبنا نستمر في الحياة لين ربي ياخذ أجله.
Five Americans freed from Iran made an emotional return to the United States on Tuesday, ending what one family member called a nightmare. It comes a day after they were swapped for 5 Iranians held in the US, and $6 billion worth of Iranian funds were unfrozen. After disembarking, the returning detainees were embraced by family and friends with smiles and laughter. Babak Namazi spoke with his arm around his returning brother, Siamak, at Fort Belvoir in Virginia.
And this is the real hero of this story, surviving 8 years of brutal treatment, but never losing hope. And showing what happens when you're hopeful, when you fight. Why am I saying this? Yeah. It's over. I'm done. It's unbelievable. We're so grateful. It's just, you feel like it's a dream. The nightmare is finally over. I've dreamt about this moment, and each time I've woken up and just been in disbelief, like, why am I dreaming these dreams and not happening? And today and tonight it happened.
The other US-Iranian dual citizens include Imad Sharki and Murad Tabaz. 2 of those returning have not been publicly identified. The swap was agreed on Monday, following months of Qatar-mediated talks, after funds that had been blocked in South Korea were wired to banks in Doha. After the transfer, the 5 US prisoners took off on a Qatari plane from Tehran. Meanwhile, 2 of the 5 Iranian detainees landed in Doha, also on their way home. Reza Sarhangpour, now back in Iran, was one of them.
Begging diplomacy in front of America has never worked, and this dignified method has made us, Iran's nation, proud.
3 Iranians chose not to go back to Iran. The deal removes a point of friction between the US and Iran, but it's unclear whether it will bring the 2 adversaries, which have been at odds for 40 years, closer on any other issues. Major points of contention include Iran's nuclear program and its backing for regional militias, US military presence in the Gulf, and US sanctions. US President Joe Biden, a Democrat who welcomed the return of the prisoners in a statement, has faced criticism from Republicans over the deal. Some say the transfer of the $6 billion could encourage Iran to detain more US citizens. But Biden aides say the money belongs to Iran and is being transferred to restricted Qatari accounts. Doha says it will monitor the cash to ensure Iran spends the money on humanitarian goods, not items under US sanctions.
Former US President Donald Trump plans to skip the next Republican presidential debate, instead heading to Detroit next week to speak to a crowd of union workers. That's according to an aide on Monday, who said Trump will forego the debate to insert himself into the dispute between striking workers and the United States' top automakers. The event will mark the second time Trump has skipped a Republican primary presidential debate in this election cycle. Despite facing a string of legal woes, the former president still leads his nearest rival by nearly 50 percentage points, according to recent opinion polls. Trump's speech signals an effort by his team to look beyond the Republican primaries and onto a likely general election rematch with Biden next November. And his address to union members points to a Trump campaign to win back some of the working-class voters who defected to Biden in his 2020 victory against Trump. It comes as the United Auto Workers Union began a strike last week against the so-called Detroit 3 carmakers over pay and other benefits. It's a labor dispute that could pose a major political threat for Biden. The current president has vocally supported unions for decades, but there is anger among some rank-and-file auto workers that he has not done enough to stand up to the manufacturers and their executives amid huge industry profits. Trump looks set to seize the opportunity to persuade auto workers and other union members that he will be on their side if he becomes president again. The current strike has geographical significance for next year's general election. Many of the affected workers are based in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, 3 key Midwestern battleground states where the presidential contest could be decided.
A federal government shutdown might be less than 2 weeks away. We've seen it all before. Popular tourist sites forced to close, and furloughed workers protesting lost wages.
No paycheck, no peace.
It could happen again on October 1st if Congress fails to approve spending bills which would keep federal agencies afloat.
Nobody wins in a government shutdown. Nobody wins in a government shutdown.
U.S. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy is facing opposition to the spending legislation from a small group of hardline Republicans. He said he would bring 2 spending bills to the House floor for consideration soon, including a short-term stopgap measure to see if they can pass. But the proposal, which would cut spending by more than 8% at most agencies, is still dead on arrival in the Democratic-controlled Senate. Congress must allocate funding to more than 400 government agencies each fiscal year, which ends on September 30th. If lawmakers don't pass those bills before the new fiscal year starts, those agencies will be unable to continue operating as normal. There have been 20 shutdowns since the 1970s, according to the Congressional Research Service. Among those, the shutdown between December 2018 and January 2019, when Republican President Donald Trump battled Democratic lawmakers over funding for a border wall. And data shows that shutdown cost the economy about $3 billion.
Hey, hey, ho, ho,
The shutdown has got to go.
Some 800,000 federal employees were furloughed without pay for 35 days during the 2018-2019 shutdown, hitting many workers right in the wallet.
We're all hurting here. We want to work. I want to work. I want to serve my country.
Our budget is blown out of the water. I have no idea how to plan for what's next.
A wide range of government services could be halted during a shutdown, from trash pickup at national parks to passport applications. Other workers deemed essential would remain on the job, but without pay. For example, military personnel would remain working, but roughly 429,000 civilian Pentagon employees would be furloughed. A debt limit is a cap set by Congress on how much money the U.S. government can borrow, which needs to be raised from time to time. Failure to do so could prevent the Treasury Department from paying its debts, and that would likely have severe consequences on global markets and could plunge the country into recession.
Más que nada, pues afecta, pues en los tiempos acordados con clientes de trabajo. Pues bueno, afecta de muchas maneras, ¿verdad? Afecta tanto familiar, tanto laboral, como para las personas que van de cruce. Pues las líneas están larguísimas. O sea.
Pues sí nos afecta, la verdad, sí, porque vamos a tardar mucho parado aquí. Tardamos hasta 4 o 5 horas en ocasiones y sí nos afecta mucho.
Hay necesidad de mover oficiales de aduanas del área comercial a ayudarle a tramitar los migrantes. En vez de quitarle poquitos a cada uno de los puentes, pues mejor cerraron, lo mismo que hicieron en abril, cerraron las instalaciones de Córdoba. La afectación en números no la conocemos porque esa se irá dando día a día. Generalmente los números más altos en las afectaciones en la industria son los exportadores o los importadores.
World leaders are gathering in New York this week for this year's United Nations General Assembly. On Tuesday, U.S. President Joe Biden and Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky used the event to continue their push for international support in the Ukraine war. But domestic politics in Washington will also likely be in their minds.
Russia alone bears responsibility for this war. Russia alone has the power to end this war immediately.
War crimes must be punished. Deported people must come back home, and the occupier must return to their own land. We must be united to make it, and we'll do it. Slava Ukraini!
This Ukraine military video is said to show its forces retaking a village last week. Biden has made rallying allies for Ukraine a centerpiece of his foreign policy, and according to Reuters Ipsos polls, strong majorities of Americans support giving weapons to Ukraine. But he's also faced criticism from some Republicans who want the U.S. to spend less money on it. That includes House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. Zelensky is expected to travel to Washington later this week and meet some congressional leaders, including McCarthy. Former President Trump, now campaigning for the 2024 election, has vowed a quick end to the war if he wins. Trump's skeptical of the United States' traditional allies, such as NATO, and he's been complimentary of Russian President Putin in the past. Meanwhile, back at the UN, President Biden is actually meeting with the presidents of several Asian countries, including Russian allies. Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, and the Kyrgyz Republic are military allies of Russia in the Collective Security Treaty Organization.
And it is a clear Russia's attempt to weaponize the food shortage on the global market in exchange for recognition for some, if not all, of the captured territories. Russia is launching the food prices as weapons. The impact spans from the Atlantic coast of Africa to the Southeast Asia, and this is the threat scale. While Russia is pushing the world to the final war, Ukraine is doing everything to ensure that after Russian aggression, no one in the world will dare to attack any nation. Weaponization must be restrained. War crimes must be punished. Deported people must come back home, and the occupier must return to their own land. We must be united to make it, and we'll do it. Slava Ukraini!
US journalist Evan Gershkovich will remain in a Russian prison after a Moscow court declined to consider his latest appeal against his pre-trial detention. The 32-year-old Wall Street Journal reporter was arrested in March in the Urals city of Yekaterinburg on charges of espionage. Russia said he was caught red-handed trying to obtain military secrets, charges he denies. It has not provided any detail to support the assertion. The US ambassador to Russia, Lynn Tracy, was in the room before the hearing on Tuesday, where Gershkovich was held in a glass box. She told reporters outside court he is being wrongfully detained.
The U.S. position remains unwavering. The charges against Evan are baseless. The Russian government locked Evan up for simply doing his job. Journalism is not a crime.
His two previous appeal attempts against his pre-trial detention in Moscow's Lefotova prison have also failed. If found guilty, he could face 20 years inside prison walls. A court spokesperson said they had considered the latest complaint and sent the case back to a lower court to eliminate circumstances impeding the consideration of the criminal case in the appeal court. Gershkovich's lawyers provided no comment to reporters at the hearing. The United States government has accused Russia of using Gershkovich to conduct hostage diplomacy, as relations between the countries are at the lowest in 60 years due to the war in Ukraine. They have also called for his immediate release.
The plight of U.S. citizens wrongfully detained in Russia remains a top priority for me, my team at the embassy, and for the entire U.S. government.
No date has been set for Gershkovich's trial.
Scientists are pointing to climate change in the aftermath of Libya's deadly floods. On Tuesday, they said it made heavy rainfall in the region up to 50 times more likely. That's according to scientists with the World Weather Attribution, an international research collaboration that studies climate change. The powerful storm that hit the country on September 10th caused 2 dams to break, inundating Libya's eastern city of Derna and killing thousands of people. Frederica Otto is a senior lecturer at the Grantham Institute for Climate Change.
I think what we consistently find, no matter how we looked at the event, which data set we use, or also which exact region we use, that we find an increase in the intensity. So while there is limitations on the data in terms of what the exact return time of the event is and the exact magnitude, that doesn't affect very much the climate change signal.
The study added that building in floodplains, poor dam condition, long-lasting armed conflict and other local factors also played a role in the disaster. It also warned that as climate change pushes weather to new extremes, it would remain risky to build homes on floodplains or to use substandard materials. Meanwhile, climate change also caused up to a 40% increase in the amount of rain that fell in early September across the Mediterranean, causing floods that killed dozens in Greece, Bulgaria, and Turkey.
Libyans are grappling with a stark new reality in the eastern city of Derna. A catastrophic flood last week killed thousands of people and swept many out to sea. Thousands more are still missing. Local resident Mustafa Kamel.
Almost a quarter of the city is gone, between those dead, those missing, as well as others who lost their homes. Certainly, the situation will change completely. The flood took place in the heart of the city and not on the outskirts.
But now the disbelief is turning to fury. Fury at what residents say was the authorities' failure to protect the city from floods and prevent the disaster. On Monday, demonstrators staged a rally and torched the home of the ousted mayor, who's been suspended. The following morning, journalists said they were ordered out of Derna. Several Arab broadcasters reported that their crews had been told to leave the city. Communications links to the city, which had functioned despite the flood, were shut down. Officials in the administration that runs the east denied they were forcing reporters out. The Eastern administration's interior minister told Arab TV channel Hadath that journalists and aid workers were operating normally. Monday's mass demonstration was the first reported in the city since it was hit by the worst natural disaster in Libya's history a week earlier. The waters were unleashed when dams burst above Derna in a storm. Angry residents say the disaster could have been prevented. Protester Mohammed bin Hamad says he hopes no Libyan companies are ever involved in rebuilding because there's so much corruption. And demonstrators denounced the eastern-based parliament speaker, who's called the flood a natural catastrophe that could not be avoided. Officials acknowledged that a contract to repair the dams after 2007 was never completed, blaming insecurity in the area.
As a global community, we should be concerned by the recent incidents of unconstitutional changes of government in some parts of Africa.
South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa called for the global community on Tuesday to support the African Union's peace efforts on the continent.
The African Union Peace and Security Council has declared that it stands ready to deepen its cooperation with the UN Security Council to silence the guns on the African continent and to achieve peace and stability and development.
His statement at the United Nations General Assembly came after a military takeover in Gabon last month when officers announced election results were annulled, minutes after President Ali Bongo was declared to have won a third term. And in July, members of Niger's Presidential Guard detained President Mohamed Bazoum inside his palace and seized power. There have been 8 coups in 3 years in West and Central Africa. Nigerian President Bola Tinubu, who chairs the main West African bloc ECOWAS, told the UN General Assembly that he was seeking to re-establish constitutional order in Niger.
Military coups are wrong. As in any titled civilian political arrangement that is, will perpetuate injustice. The wave-crossing part of Africa does not demonstrate favor towards coup. It is a demand for solution to perennial problem. Let us dig it deeper.
ECOWAS has been trying to negotiate with the Niger military junta. It has said it is ready to deploy troops to restore constitutional order if diplomatic efforts fail. The decision by ECOWAS in August to activate a so-called standby force for a possible intervention has raised fears of an escalation that could further destabilize the insurgency-torn Sahel region. The junta in Niger last month ordered its armed forces to go on highest alert, citing an increased threat of attack. More than 1,200 children have died of suspected measles and malnutrition in Sudan refugee camps since May. That's according to United Nations agencies on Tuesday. Sudan's army and paramilitary group Rapid Support Forces have been fighting for nearly 6 months. The UN agencies say the country's healthcare sector is on its knees due to direct attacks from warring parties, as well as shortages of staff and medicines. Dr. Alan Maina, Chief of Public Health at the UN Refugee Agency, told a briefing in Geneva that some 3,100 suspected measles cases and 500 cholera cases have been reported across the country since May, along with outbreaks of dengue and malaria.
And unfortunately, we fear that the numbers will continue rising because of strained resources. As partners have mentioned, WHO and UNICEF, we continue having challenges, logistical and other challenges to ensure supplies are adequately provided, to ensure the vaccines are adequately provided to all the targeted refugees, trying to expand the target age group for vaccination.
James Elder, a spokesperson for the UN Children's Agency, UNICEF, said the organization worried that many thousands newborns among the 333,000 babies known to be due before the end of the year would die.
They and their mothers, as you heard, do need skilled delivery care, rather in a country where millions are trapped, millions are lacking access to those basic healthcare services, and there are, of course, grave shortages of medical supplies. Such care is becoming less and less likely by the day.
He added that every month, some 55,000 children require treatment for the worst form of malnutrition in Sudan. But fewer than 1 in 50 nutrition centers are functional in the capital Khartoum and 1 in 10 in West Darfur.
Britain's high inflation rate fell unexpectedly in August. That's what official data showed on Wednesday. The Consumer Price Index dropped slightly to 6.7% from July's 6.8%. Britain's Office for National Statistics said the fall was driven by a drop in hotel prices and airfares. It also cited food prices rising by less than at the same time last year. That offset a jump in fuel prices and a tax rise on alcoholic drinks. It means inflation reached its lowest since February last year. Economists had forecast that price rises would accelerate. The data now raises questions for investors on how much higher Britain's central bank will take interest rates. The Bank of England is due to announce its next policy decision on Thursday. Investors had expected a 15th rate rise in a row, but that now looks much less certain. The numbers will make welcome reading, though, for Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, who has promised to halve inflation this year.
Walt Disney is boosting spending on its theme parks as it faces challenges elsewhere. It told analysts and investors at a conference Tuesday it would nearly double its capital expenditures for its parks business to $60 billion over the next 10 years. Parks have become a reliable profit engine for Disney and has helped cushion losses in the Disney Plus streaming business, which is expected to become profitable only next year. CEO Bob Iger has described the parks as a tremendous business for the California-based global entertainment company. Disney noted in a blog post that periods of significant investment have spurred attendance. Iger has said the company plans to invest $17 billion over the next decade in Florida, where it is embroiled in a dispute with Governor Ron DeSantis, a Republican presidential candidate. It also is laying out long-term plans for new attractions and amenities at its Disneyland resort in Anaheim, California. It is seeking to appeal to some 700 million consumers identified by the company's internal research as Disney fans who have yet to visit one of its theme parks. According to a regulatory filing, Disney said it had a strong enough balance sheet and borrowing capacity to fund its growth initiatives. The announcement of the planned investment followed a slowdown at Walt Disney World in Orlando as attendance surges at its parks around the world, particularly Shanghai Disney Resort and Hong Kong Disneyland. Disney also plans to nearly double the capacity of its cruise line, adding 2 ships in fiscal 2025 and another in 2026. Shares of Disney fell nearly 4% in Tuesday trading.
Amazon devices, including the Kindle and Fire TV Stick, are set to get a refresh this week, but workers in the unit that makes those products appear to be feeling less than refreshed. Morale within Amazon's once-storied hardware division, known as Lab 126, has suffered amid staff cutbacks and key executive departures, with many of those remaining worried that new devices in development will flop. That's according to more than 15 current and former employees interviewed by Reuters who spoke on the condition of anonymity due to their employment terms. Those interviewed described a hodgepodge of new devices in development, including ones that encourage customers to use the once groundbreaking Alexa voice service, which now faces stiff challenges in the age of generative AI and ChatGPT. Reuters was able to identify 5 different new devices under development. These include a carbon monoxide detector and a household energy consumption monitor, both with Alexa built into them, as well as a home projector to make any surface a screen. A spokesperson for Amazon declined to comment on products in development. In a written response to questions about morale, a spokeswoman said, quote, "To suggest that a few anecdotes paint a picture of reality for an organization as large and diverse as devices and services is inaccurate." But the sources said the lab's years of losses and shifting strategies have dampened the mood. Many pointed to the Astro home monitoring robot that launched in 2021 that, at $1,600, remains niche and was criticized for giving some consumers the creeps. That followed a series of poorly selling devices such as a voice assistant-powered clock, the Fire smartphone, and a camera that doubles as a personal stylist. Meanwhile, Amazon said it is developing a generative AI of its own to bolster Alexa, but hasn't revealed much beyond an August assertion that, quote, "Every one of our teams is working on building generative AI applications."
Huawei might be about to launch a mid-range 5G phone as soon as October. That was the report from China's IT Times on Tuesday. The report said Huawei may bring out a 5G version of its mid-ranged Nova next month or in November. The firm did not immediately respond to a request for comment from the IT Times. If the product appears, it would be another sign the Chinese tech giant has overcome US sanctions. Washington has restricted Huawei's access to chip-making tools since 2019. Those semiconductors are crucial for producing the most advanced handsets. So it's left Huawei only able to launch limited numbers of 5G models using stockpiled chips. Last month, Huawei rolled out the Mate 60 Pro smartphone with little advertising or prior notice. Research firms say they've found it's powered by a locally made 7nm processor and is 5G capable. That would be a breakthrough in China's efforts to make chips domestically.
With the number of Chinese couples getting married in decline, scenes like this are becoming a rarer sight. Less matrimony is a worrying trend for wedding planners in China, an industry estimated at almost $500 billion just 3 years ago. Yuan Jialiang ran a full-scale wedding planning business for almost a decade in Shanghai, before switching to wedding photography as demand for his services began to fall, and he hasn't looked back.
In the process of switching from wedding planning to wedding photography, I started to realize that actually couples' demands for photography and videography will not change. No matter how the format of the wedding changes, no matter how the scales of the wedding changes, they still have the demand to record this precious time. So I found that I've made the right career change.
China's wedding industry already hit a rough patch during the pandemic, when many couples delayed their ceremonies. There were 6.8 million marriages across China last year, which is 800,000 fewer than in 2021, and the lowest since the government began publishing the data in 1986. Now, a bigger threat looms in couples less willing to spring for an all-out wedding. Ceremonies in China are traditionally elaborate, expensive affairs, but wedding planners report that couples who do go for it are spending less. This drop in marriage registrations will likely exacerbate the decline in births in China, already one of the fastest aging societies in the world. Many cities deny unmarried mothers child raising or healthcare subsidies, and having children out of wedlock is often frowned upon. As the economy weakens and consumer confidence wanes, those in the industry are finding little cause for optimism.
The whole environment has contributed to the fact that the wedding industry is not very prosperous now. I was probably hopeful for another big industry climax, but now I'm more worried than optimistic about the prospects.
With high jobless rates and low household spending among the young and the middle class, Jewel Wong, who owns several stores in China selling designer wedding dresses, is staking the future of her company on wealthier clients that have weathered the economic downturn.
COVID caused such a big impact on everybody's lives. As a market, we see an absolute downturn in spending. So all alongside, our strategy have been niche. We don't want to flow with the broader market because we don't think that's in a good place to go.
Je voudrais vraiment faire passer le message que n'importe quel corps peut faire du sport, peut même rêver à du sport de haut niveau. Et en plus de ça, j'ai envie de montrer aussi qu'on peut bouger un peu les lignes. Pour moi, le cyclisme sur piste, en fait, c'est le moyen que j'ai trouvé actuellement de continuer à me faire ressentir ce que je ressentais quand je pouvais encore courir. Donc c'est un moyen pour moi de m'adapter à mon handicap tout en continuant de m'épanouir avec les sensations que j'avais quand j'étais en capacité de courir. Donc c'est vrai que la sensation de vitesse, pour moi, c'est très enivrant. Quand dire à un athlète que si elle voulait pas un sport sexiste, il fallait faire un sport de fille en 2021 sur des Jeux paralympiques, je trouve que ça résume énormément le comportement misogyne qu'il y a au sein encore des staffs. On peut lutter contre le sexisme, on peut lutter contre la misogynie, on peut mettre en avant l'inclusion et la rendre encore plus large et généreuse. Donc voilà, c'est les messages que j'ai envie de faire passer.
Yeah, I feel like it's gotten hotter, and personally, I think about my future. Like, while these guys are older, when they die, they don't have to worry about what we have to worry about in the future.
You know, my brother lives in Boston, and he was commenting also on the changing weather there. So it's a global issue, I think, isn't it? That needs to be highlighted.
This patch of ocean off the eastern coast of Thailand has been dubbed a dead zone. According to scientists, no animals can survive here due to the growth of plankton. While normal amounts of the plant can be beneficial, the overwhelming bloom has reached harmful levels, depriving marine life of food and oxygen and turning the seawater green for as far as the eye can see.
เราเห็นว่าไอ้ตัวไฮพ็อกเซียแอนนอกเซียเนี่ยครับมันใหญ่มากเดดโซนที่มันไม่มีออกซิเจนมันใหญ่มากไอ้ตรงเนี้ยเหตุผลเดียวก็เพียงพอที่จะฆ่าปลาปริมาณมหาศาลที่มันเกยตื้นได้แล้ว
Thanapong Polkarwani is a marine scientist from Kesar University. He and a team of scientists have been collecting water samples to see what type of plankton has been growing. The water is dense and slimy as a pungent smell of grass and dead fish permeates the air. Plankton covers a quarter of the Gulf of Thailand. Half of it is green where the plant is thriving, while the other half, closer to the shore, has turned brown or even darker from pollution and dead plankton.
แพลงก์ตอนที่มันอยู่ในน้ำเนี่ยมันกินสารอาหารจนหมดหรือว่ามันตายเพราะว่ามันไม่มีแสงนะฮะแล้วมันก็จะซากของมันเนี่ยก็จะตกลงที่พื้นท้องน้ำแล้วก็โดนย่อยสลายโดยแบคทีเรียตอนย่อยสลายเนี่ยมันก็ทำให้ออกซิเจนในน้ำหมดไปนะครับก็คิดว่ากระบวนการ eutrophication นี่แหละครับเป็นกระบวนการที่กำลังเกิดขึ้นแล้วก็ทำให้ปลาตายเยอะมากณปัจจุบัน
For local fishermen, the loss of marine life is a threat to their livelihoods. There are more than 260 mussel farming plots along this coastline. More than 80% have been severely impacted by the plankton, according to the Chonburi Fisheries Association. Sucha Bowa is one of those to have been affected. In the business for more than 20 years, he owns about 10 farming plots and says he's seen losses of more than $14,000 since the start of the year.
น่าจะเสียหาย 100% นะครับตรงนี้นะเนี่ยพอเขย่ามันก็หล่นเนี่ยไม่มีตัวเป็นเหลือแล้วครับตายหมดแล้วทั้งหอยนางรมด้วยนะปกติมันจะมีหอยนางรมเกาะด้วย
Back in the lab, Thanaspong's team has discovered the current plankton bloom is of the Noctiluca species. That's the same species that bloomed in 2020, the last time the region saw the El Nino effect. The climate pattern causes, amongst other things, warmer sea temperatures in the eastern Pacific Ocean. Thanaspong wants to study whether the two are linked. In August, the global ocean saw the warmest daily surface temperature on record and had its warmest month overall.
ซึ่งตอนนี้ทุกคนยอมรับแล้วแหละว่าเอลนิโญกระบวนการที่มันเกิดขึ้นที่ไกลๆนะครับมหาสมุทรแปซิฟิกเนี่ยมันส่งผลกระทบกับประเทศไทยเอลนิโญเนี่ยทำให้เกิดความแห้งแล้งทำให้อุณหภูมิน้ำทะเลสูงขึ้นนะครับบางคนก็ไปรีเลทว่าเฮ้ยเอลนิโญพอดีนะแล้วปีนี้เขาพิจิตรด้วยว่าเอลนิโญรุนแรงมันก็บังเอิญประกอบกับไอตัวแพลงก์ตอนบูมที่เกิดรุนแรงแต่ถ้าเกิดจะพูดเชิงวิชาการเรายังไม่ได้ข้อสรุปที่ชัดเจนเราเห็นความบังเอิญของมันเฉยๆว่ามันบังเอิญเกิดขึ้นพร้อมกันนะครับ
While the cause of the intense plankton bloom remains unclear, scientists believe pollution and the intense heat caused by climate change are to blame.
Sí, es una noticia lamentable, ya que nuestras aves son endémicas, son nativas. Vamos a mantener el monitoreo permanente en los sitios donde se ha detectado aves visiblemente afectadas. La primera medida es cerrar estos sitios de visita. Obviamente necesitamos actuar como guardaparques y Parque Nacional Galapagos en cada uno de los sitios, hacer monitoreos, hacer vigilancia efectiva en cada uno de los sitios y ir tomando las medidas de acuerdo al protocolo que tenemos. La mayor preocupación está hoy enfocada en nuestras poblaciones de pingüinos, cormoranes y albatros. Son aves endémicas, son aves muy susceptibles también a cualquier efecto de cambio climático, falta de alimentación y más aún si se trata de una enfermedad. Entonces estamos enfocando esfuerzos a monitorear el estado poblacional y la salud de estas tres especies y de todas las especies de aves.
We've got to hang on to optimism and hope because it is the biggest driver of change. It is the biggest driver of innovation. think if I can reach more investors and people see this isn't a philanthropic thing, we're not doing this to be philanthropic, we're doing this because the vast majority of these solutions are commercially viable. I think that will help people realise and understand that this has got legs of its own and the momentum will take it forwards.
Yeah, we were thinking just comparing because when we started playing in Italy and we were releasing like one of our first singles, we played it for the first time like on the streets. So it was crazy to now see the comparison between when we played it in the streets like of our hometown and now playing it like in New York, you know.
Sometimes you get this feeling of like it's a little bit scary because you don't know if you're going to be able to build healthy and long relationships, but at the same time, of course, it gave us the possibility to do a lot of great things also outside of our job. It opened a lot of doors for us. So like everything else has pros and cons.
This is Reuters.